A single rolled carpet carried into the palace of Egypt. Inside it, not a gift, a queen. Everyone assumes what happened next was a love story. It wasn't. It was the most dangerous gamble in the ancient world. A queen in exile using the most powerful man in Rome to fight her own war. This alliance would raise one empire and drown another in blood. Cleopatra was young, but she was no ordinary queen. She spoke multiple languages, was highly educated, and ancient writers remembered her as an exceptionally persuasive conversationalist. She even learned the Egyptian language, something surprisingly rare among her Ptolemaic predecessors. So Cleopatra had intelligence, charisma, and a plan. He was Caesar, one of Rome's greatest generals, a master politician with legions behind him. Putting these two in the same room was already dangerous enough. In 48 BC, Cleopatra was queen of Egypt, but mostly in name, because in reality she had been driven out of her own kingdom. When her father, Ptolemy XII, died, Cleopatra was still a young ruler. According to Ptolemaic tradition, she was expected to rule alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, but in the royal court, wearing the crown didn't necessarily mean holding the power. Advisors, generals, and palace officials surrounding the young king began building power of their own, and before long Cleopatra was pushed out. She was forced to flee Alexandria, but she didn't surrender. East of Egypt, Cleopatra began gathering forces loyal to her. Egypt now had two rulers, and both wanted the same throne. The kingdom was drifting toward civil war, and just then another civil war arrived from across the Mediterranean, with Julius Caesar. Rome was tearing itself apart as well. On one side stood Julius Caesar, on the other his former ally, and now greatest rival, Pompey. Once one of the most powerful men in Rome, Pompey was forced to flee after his defeat by Caesar. One of the places he turned to was Egypt, but when Pompey reached the Egyptian coast, he didn't find sanctuary. The men surrounding Ptolemy XIII made a calculation. Caesar was winning, so perhaps killing Caesar's enemy would earn the friendship of Rome's new strongman. Pompey was murdered before he could truly find refuge. Then Caesar arrived in Alexandria. The Egyptians presented him with Pompey's severed head. They probably expected gratitude. They didn't get it. Caesar was reportedly appalled by the fate of his former rival. More importantly, he now found himself standing directly in the middle of Egypt's struggle for the throne. Cleopatra saw her opportunity and decided to make the greatest gamble of her life. Cleopatra needed to meet Caesar. There was just one problem. Alexandria was controlled by her brother's faction. Entering the palace openly could have ended with her capture. Or worse, according to the famous account preserved by the ancient historian Plutarch, Cleopatra was secretly smuggled into Caesar's quarters. Today, the story usually says she was rolled inside a carpet. The ancient account is slightly different. It describes something closer to a large bedding sack or bundle. But the exact object isn't really the important part. The risk is. If Cleopatra was discovered, everything could have ended before she ever reached Caesar. But the plan worked. Cleopatra appeared before him, and this meeting is often remembered as the beginning of one of history's greatest romances. But there was something far more important on the table that night. Power. Cleopatra needed Caesar. Caesar needed stability in Egypt. Egypt was wealthy. It produced enormous quantities of grain, and it occupied an immensely important position in the eastern Mediterranean. For one brief moment, their interests aligned. Caesar attempted to settle the dispute between Cleopatra and her brother, but for the powerful men surrounding Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra's return threatened everything they had built. If she regained power, they could lose theirs. The political crisis quickly became a war, and suddenly one of Rome's greatest generals found himself trapped in a foreign capital, facing forces far larger than his own. Fighting broke out across Alexandria. The harbor became a battlefield. And during the struggle, ancient sources describe a major fire in the city. Later traditions connected that fire with the destruction of the famous Library of Alexandria. Exactly what burned, and how much was actually destroyed, remains debated. But one thing was now undeniable. Cleopatra's struggle for the throne was no longer simply an Egyptian civil war. Roman soldiers were fighting in it. Eventually, Caesar received reinforcements. The balance shifted. Ptolemy XIII's forces were defeated. The young king fled the battlefield and drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra had won. She returned to the Egyptian throne. But Rome did not completely abandon the traditional Ptolemaic arrangement. Cleopatra was now formally associated on the throne with another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. On paper, Egypt remained an independent kingdom, but in reality, Roman power could now be felt inside the palace itself. Caesar's soldiers had played a decisive role in restoring Cleopatra. Her gamble had worked, but victory came with a price. Rome was no longer simply an outside power watching Egyptian politics from across the Mediterranean. The door had been opened, and it would never completely close again. So what about their relationship? There is strong ancient tradition that their political alliance became something more. Cleopatra later gave birth to a son. His official name was Ptolemy XV, but history remembers him by another name, Caesarion, Little Caesar. Cleopatra presented Caesar as the boy's father. How far Caesar himself formally acknowledged that claim is much more complicated, because in Rome the political implications were enormous. Caesar was already married, and more importantly, Rome was not a monarchy. At least that was what Romans still told themselves. The image of Rome's most powerful leader involved with a foreign queen, with a possible son connected to him, could be deeply uncomfortable for the Roman elite. Then Cleopatra came to Rome. An Egyptian queen was now living in the heart of the Republic. At the same time, Caesar's power was reaching unprecedented levels. Dictatorial authority, extraordinary honors, statues, and growing fear among his political opponents. Cleopatra did not cause those fears, but her presence provided a powerful symbol that could easily be connected to one terrifying possibility, that Caesar wanted to become a king. And if there was one word the Roman aristocracy hated, it was king. 44 BC, March 15th. Caesar entered a meeting of the Senate. Among the men waiting for him were people he knew, men he had trusted. Then the attack began. Senators surrounded him, blades were drawn, and the most powerful man in Rome was killed in the political heart of the Republic. Cleopatra was suddenly in an extraordinarily dangerous position. The man who had supported her was dead. Caesar's assassins were fighting over Rome's future. His supporters wanted revenge. Cleopatra left Rome. She returned to Egypt. Her alliance with Caesar had restored her throne. Now that alliance was gone. Once again, Cleopatra had to find a way to survive. Caesar's death did not save the Roman Republic, it did the opposite. Another civil war followed, and among the men fighting over Caesar's legacy, two names began to rise above the rest, Octavian and Mark Antony. Cleopatra now understood something crucial. Egypt's future would not be decided in Alexandria alone. Whoever won the struggle for Rome could ultimately determine the fate of Egypt as well. And so years later, Cleopatra would once again form an alliance with one of Rome's most powerful men. This time, it wouldn't be Caesar. It would be Mark Antony. But Cleopatra's second great gamble would end very differently from her first. For 2,000 years, Caesar and Cleopatra have been remembered as one of history's great love stories. But love was only part of it. Cleopatra was an exiled queen fighting for her throne. Caesar was a Roman general emerging victorious from a civil war. Each saw something in the other that they needed. Cleopatra gained Roman military support and reclaimed her throne. Caesar helped establish a political order in one of the wealthiest and most strategically important kingdoms in the Mediterranean. For a time, they both won. But when Caesar was murdered, the political world surrounding their alliance began to collapse, and Cleopatra's next alliance would eventually place her against the man destined to become Rome's first emperor, Octavian. Years later, Cleopatra's kingdom would fall. Egypt would come under Roman control. And that secret meeting with Caesar would be remembered as the beginning of something much larger. Because what emerged from that bundle wasn't simply a queen, it was the beginning of a struggle that would bind the destinies of Rome and Egypt together.